Now, who owns stocks? Well, the smart ass answer would be shareholders, right? But who owns stocks? Rich people? Well, everyone owns stocks in a sense. Aside from the many people who like to speculate, who like to day trade, a lot of people own stocks indirectly through investment. In particular, there's a thing called pension funds. Now, I'll tell you up front, if your dream in life is to live off Social Security, you need to find a different dream because you're not going to make it. It's not big enough. Also, Social Security will probably collapse at some point in the future. I do not expect to ever get to. It's a scam. You want to hear someone really rant? Go ask Professor Bradley Hobbs in the econ department about Social Security. He'll talk your ear off. No, for the most part, people have to do their own investing if they're gonna survive in old age. And oftentimes it's done through your job. You got those, Roth IRAs, you got your 401ks, you got all that shit. But the general idea with a pension fund, like the kinds that some workplaces offer to their workers, save a chunk of your income, put it into the fund, and then you get to withdraw on it when you're old enough. The idea of them is that people are pooling their money, and then the fund managers hire professional stockbrokers to manage that money, to invest it on the customer's behalf. And then the managers are going to share the profits with the investors. Day trading is hard, and you are not going to succeed at it in the end. There is no reliable way to beat the market. There was a very famous book called A Random Walk Down Wall Street. This guy essentially argued that stock markets just kind of fluctuate randomly. Um, and on average, you can't beat them. You can't beat the index. There's always going to be people who get lucky, but there was this interesting idea proposed once. When you see someone who always gets it right, it's tempting to attribute it to their own talent. But the whole metaphor of the monkeys at typewriters, that, you'd have a room full of 100 monkeys and they're all banging away. Eventually, one of them, through sheer chance, is going to write, Romeo and Juliet. Well, there is a mathematical basis to that. You might compare it to like flipping coins. If you have people flip coins all day long, well, in an individual coin flip, it's 50-50 heads and tails. And due to that law of large numbers, if you keep flipping coins, you would expect that on average, you're going to get heads like 50% of the time. You might occasionally have runs of good luck where, say, you get a bunch of tails in a row or a bunch of heads in a row. But the more times you do this, the more it's going to look like the underlying probability distribution. But the flip side of this is that even if it's extremely unlikely that someone could flip heads all the time, if you have enough people simultaneously doing this, it starts to become extremely unlikely that one person would not draw heads all the time. Then you get a similar thing with stock investing. There was a quite a character. I need to pull his name up. Timothy Dexter. Yeah, you'll want to look up Timothy Dexter, and you might as well just watch the Sam O'Nella video on it because he's funny. Um, he's a prime example of a monkey banging on a typewriter. Man who always made the worst decisions imaginable, but they would always just miraculously work out to make him even richer, like the Forrest Gump of business. Kind of got off topic. But anyways, you have these pension funds, and then there's a specific type of pension fund called a, well, actually not necessarily a pension. You don't have, these aren't run through workplaces, but there's a type of fund called a mutual fund that does the same thing as a pension fund, but with a specific focus on a well-diversified portfolio. So your portfolio is your collection of stocks. Similar word is like, portfolio photos, oh, I'm going to open up my book and see all my holdings in it. Well, like I said about the indices, individual stocks may go down, but the economy as a whole tends to grow in the long run. I say always. It always does in the first world for about nigh on 220 years. That's always for our purposes. And so, if you buy a portfolio that roughly matches the stock market index, you know that since the stock market index just about always goes up in the long run, your portfolio is just about always going to go up in the long run. Now, a lot of stocks are rather expensive. I think I looked up Google once. I was considering buying one of those, and it was at like $300 per share. It could be unaffordable to build your own well-diversified portfolio, but in a mutual fund, you don't have to do that because a bunch of people are pulling their money together. And they can afford anything they want as a collective. And so these things, they're in theory, they're a great way to invest for retirement because they're low reward, but they're also low risk. You're not going to get rich, but you will have something to live on in old age. In contrast to, you know, playing the coin flipping game. If you're curious, my main inspiration in saying this is Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey does a lot of common sense financial advice. Frankly, if you're actually good at finance, you have nothing to learn from him. But if you're the kind of person that runs up horrific credit card debt, then he's pretty wise. Yeah, you might want to look up Dave Ramsey and Financial Peace University. I am not the kind who lives on credit card debt. I have a spreadsheet that includes every single purchase I have made for going on 4 years straight. It's awesome. Now, a couple of side topics. One I wanted to tell you about was franchising. I figure a lot of you know what a franchise is, but just in case you didn't, franchising is when you pay for the right to use the corporation's model and brand. So the company isn't going to open or be responsible for a given location, but somebody on the ground, somebody who lives there, sees an opportunity and they're willing to pony up the cash and be responsible for it. And so they do so. You go to the company and say, hey, you, McDonald's, may not want to run a place here, but I do. And I'll just pay you if you let me, like, have a golden arch, have a Ronald McDonald clown in the corner. If you let me have access to your world-class, logistical systems, one of the modern wonders of the world. In the franchising agreement, it'll lay down all of the expectations. These aren't just restaurants, but restaurants are the obvious ones. We have a certain brand image. We expect you to uphold that image. We expect you to have a certain level of quality. We expect you to not deviate too much from what we do. Although one of the strengths of franchising is that they do often allow franchises to experiment a little bit locally, especially to suit like regional tastes. But yeah, the franchise owner, he doesn't work for the company, but he has a contract that allows him to use the business model of the company. And they just kick back some of the dough, like they're paying tribute to a warlord. This is useful for a company that wants to grow very, very fast. Now, here, you've got a real American hero, Colonel Harlan Sanders. I got to visit his original KFC in Corbin, Kentucky this summer. And like that was no joke. That was the highlight of my summer. I was ecstatic. Well, Colonel Sanders, he was quite a character. He actually got his Kentucky Colonel title from all the services he performed as a country midwife delivering babies. He entered the Hall of Fame as an American gunslinger when he shot a rival gas station owner in a shootout. And he also helped to revolutionize the modern restaurant industry through his invention of the pressure cooker, his mystical secret recipe of 11 herbs and spices, but also his pioneering use of franchising. See, Sanders was not he was not the man to invent the concept. This concept has been around forever. In fact, a lot of the early colonies in the New World were basically franchises of the homeland. Boy, I wish I was teaching you secret history of the corporation. The short of it is that they literally had this like contract where you promise, oh yes, I will open up another Spain. It will be called New Spain. I'll kick you back some of the loot in exchange for having the right to operate a Spain in the name of Spain. It's just like opening up another McDonald's, just with a lot more rape and plunder involved. Well, what made Sanders remarkable was how much he relied on this compared to a lot of the other fast food tycoons. See, where do you think this statue was photographed? You probably assume that that's from Corbin, Kentucky, right? But it's not. It's from Salt Lake City, out in Utah, deep within darkest Mormon country. Why? Well, the very first KFC ever opened was in Salt Lake City, Utah. See, Colonel Sanders was an old man by the time he invented his pressure cooker, by the time he developed his vision for KFC. He was already in his 60s. And he had no energy to build everything up himself. So what he does instead is he starts traveling door to door looking for possible franchisees. He starts looking for people, pitching this idea to them. Hey, I will sell you my likeness. I'll sell you my recipe. I'll sell you my invention, and you can run a KFC on my behalf. And like a prophet in his own land, he was rejected amongst his own people. And he had to travel far and wide until finally it took him way out to the deserts of the Great Salt Lake, where someone finally gave him a chance. Late into his 60s, first KFC begins. And every KFC since then has been a franchise. I don't know that any other major food chain ever ran itself that way. Now, I also wanted to tell you a bit about bonds. They're a boring topic, but they end up coming up in central banking monetary policy, so it's good just to get this out of the way. A bond is nothing more than a loan you can resell. That's it. You buy the bond from its issuer in exchange for a payment, what's called par value, when the bond hits maturity. And all that is it's just a loan with heirs put on it. They come up with all these like convoluted names, unfamiliar stuff. par value maturity. It's a loan. It's a loan and it pays interest. But what makes it unique is that much like how joint stock is set up so that you can sell your stock to someone else, bonds are written in such a way that you can sell them to someone else. Instead of the debt being specifically between you and the bond issuer, the bond is made generic and it's made in such a small denomination that if you want to sell the bond, if you want to sell the right to collect the repayment to another party, you can do that. So, for example, the bond might have been give me $100 and I'll give you 150 a year from now. But say a few months in, you're impatient, something has come up in your life and you need the money badly. You might go to some other person and say, hey, I'm willing to sell you this bond for 125. Well, if the bond's going to pay out 150 when it hits maturity, they might be willing to pay you 125. And so you've profited, and this other party will also profit. That's what I mean about reselling. You resell it because you know that you'll still get interest, you just won't get at the whole amount of interest back. Now, why am I talking about it in reference to corporations? Well, bonds are mostly issued by two types of entities, corporations and governments. And this is because they both have the same problem. See, when you're small and you need a loan, it makes sense for you to go to a bank. If you were to just step outside and shout to the public, hey there, who wants to give me a loan? Who wants to make me an offer? People are going to laugh at you. Why would anybody want to trust some random jerk off with their money? But if you're a very big institution, then you have this problem. It might be hard to find a bank that is big enough that it feels comfortable giving you a loan that large. But on the other hand, as such a bank, as such an entity, you're also so big that you have a reputation with the public. Everyone knows that you're very, very likely going to be good for it. They know that you're so big and successful that you'll be able to pay them back. So whereas the individual consumer wouldn't walk out into public and shout to the winds, who's going to give me a mortgage for my house? A company or a government can do that. They can go to the public and say, all right, I have loans I need, start making me offers. And what they'll do is they will divide that debt up into very small amounts so that it's practical for individual consumers to buy the bond. Again, when you buy a bond, you're really making them a loan. But they'll be affordable for normal folks. And this is one way that corporations finance themselves. Where this comes up later in the semester is when I talk about how the Federal Reserve uses bond markets as a way to manipulate the money supply. It's one of the main ways that they're going to control the business cycle. And then one final topic to wrap this up. I wanted to talk a little bit about something that I just find personally interesting. Cooperatives or mutuals, or co-ops, right? That's just short for cooperative. Now, a cooperative is itself a partnership or corporation. It's not a business structure in and of itself. It can be any of the types of business structure. But it's a partnership or corporation in which the partners or owners are also the workers or the customers. You have them in both types. And in theory, a co-op can combine the productivity of a corporate business structure with the ideals of socialism, or, as I prefer, Jeffersonian democracy. See, one of the common socialist complaints about big business is that it contributes to income inequality. The business owner does not do the work. In reality, understand it takes a lot of work to run a company, but the business owner doesn't do the work of making the product, and yet they reap most of the rewards of the business. And likewise, from a Jeffersonian perspective, there's a concern about people's personal independence. A man who's self-employed is his own master and is the ideal voter. But a man who works on behalf of other people, who is an employee, is not his own master. And by concentrating so much wealth in the hands of so few people, even if inequality is not immoral, it's still a danger to democracy. That too is a concept we'll see in Unit 4. We'll actually see an argument for why capitalism supports democracy, but this can be corrupted if you have too much income inequality in a society. Well, if you have a business where the workers or the customers own the business, there's no need for profits anymore. If it's owned by the workers, then they could simply pay out higher wages because there's no bourgeois that's collecting all of the collecting the excess. If the co-op is owned by the customers, there's no need for profits, and so you could charge less for the good and make more savings for the customer. In practice, though, we tend to find that these sorts of co-ops have a lot of trouble with free riders and incentive structures. Mostly, this just comes down to the sort of people that like to found a co-op. Very often, co-ops go hand in hand with communes, and they have the same problems either way. They're often created by utopian thinkers, romantics, hippies, also religious radicals, but especially hippies. People that believe that everyone should get the same income no matter what work they put in, or that there should be no such thing as money. I haven't touched that one yet, but that comes up in currency, right? Why we have money, why money is good. Usually when co-ops have functioned well, it's been because they have adapted the structure of the business to have certain capitalist features. That there is different pay for different jobs. That there is still, some kind of money. That people only get what they put into it. Oftentimes at a co-op food store, the customers will get reduced rates if they do more volunteering at the co-op. But what we have not seen is any major social movement to try to turn most businesses into co-ops. Even so, there are a number of practical, widespread co-op types in American society. A lot of corporations give their labor union shares. Not just the employees have shares, but the union itself has shares. And they do this to try to motivate the labor union to prioritize the well-being of the corporation and not just the workers. Because if the workers own part of the corporation, then what's in the interest of the corporation is in their own interest too. Then there are things like our utility companies that we've discussed in the past, in the competition lectures. Because utilities are natural monopolies, it often seems fair that they ought to be co-ops. If it's a co-op, if it's run by the customers, then the customers will be able to keep the price down because they're not in it for a profit. If they make a profit, they make the profit at their own expense. So what you get is electricity, water, whatever it may be, priced at just the right amount, just the amount it needs to be in order to be efficient. I told you how those of you who like trade stocks, you might have gotten mail about shareholder elections in the past. Well, you have probably gotten an electric bill at some point that gave you a little credit, gave you a like some tiny amount of pay. I've gotten it before. I'm pretty sure that my electric company, Blue Ridge Electric, is a co-op. I could be wrong. I have to pull it up. I don't care because it's just something you don't really think about, you know? You get one utility company in an area and you're just stuck with it. But yeah, they're often run as co-ops. Then you get these types of banks, credit unions. Credit unions are co-ops. They exist to provide cheap loans to a community. The bank is actually owned by the community, and so it doesn't have to charge as high of interest because it's not in it to make a profit. And then you get other kinds of collective action. So farmers tend to be real into this stuff. Now, what you're not going to see is normal red-blooded red state farmers setting up communes. They don't tend to run their farm itself as a co-op, but they will create agricultural co-ops to share resources. They won't share their land, but they'll share a pool of machinery. They'll share a pool of funding like a credit union would. They'll share pools of seeds. They'll pitch in together for educational programs on things like agronomy. And it was even farmer cooperation that created the American high school as we know it. High schools actually existed like way back into the early 1800s, but they had a very different function. Back in those days, they were essentially just preparatory schools for college. High school, as you know it now, emerged out of the Midwest, and it emerged out of communities where everyone was a farmer, everyone was in it together. And so they would set up schools that could teach their children how to be better farmers, which, of course, reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also other things too, like biology, you know, a better understanding of agricultural sciences, accounting methods, things of that nature. Despite all the whining you'll hear people make about it, America at least had world-class education. Nobody else in the world had college education as widespread and as high quality as we do. There's a reason why so many foreign students go to the US, but nobody in America goes to China or India to study. Likewise, this secondary education, primary education, the South always lagged behind the rest of the country, but even in the South, it was better than what they had in Europe. It actually blew my mind one day. I was listening to my doctoral advisor, Professor Robert Tamura, and I had to look it up. He was right, but he was talking about how in World War II, Black American servicemen from the South were better educated on average than Englishmen. America really prioritized schooling back in the day. It's not a matter of a lack of investment. It's a matter of mismanagement of the schools. I can promise you this. I went to a public school, have no complaints about it at all. Went to a public university, and I've done a lot better for myself than some of my colleagues that, you know, were private school all the way. But I would not put a kid in public school today because my mother teaches public school, so I get all the horror stories about it. I know a lot of you watching this are going to be education majors. I don't know about in the state of South Carolina, but in the state of Tennessee, they have students now that they can't punish. It's in their IEP. They the individual education plan explicitly states you're not allowed to punish them. You can only reward them for good behaviors. This is why your American schooling sucks now. It's because they let the inmates run the asylum. Well, speaking of education, you also get co-ops in education too. Um, with things like homeschooling, it tends to be really bad quality. Can be very good reasons to not want to homeschool your kid or to not want to public school your kids, but you don't have a private school around that's worth going to. Well, what some families do is they set up these programs where they find, who's good at what subject. Is there one family where, the mother knows a lot of science, another family where the father knows a lot of history, and they'll pick different people to be different teachers and they rotate through them. They they set up things like sports leagues so that their kids can have, the same kind of experience that public school kids would have. You get these sorts of educational co-ops. You get this one isn't as big nowadays just because Whole Foods exists now, but back in the day, it was hard to find organic food and other stuff. It was hard to find crap like avocados for your avocado toast. Health food originally spread through co-ops. Whenever you have a business model where there's a group of dedicated people, like fanatical about it, who are willing to put in the work, but there's just not enough of them for, say, a bank to want to bankroll it, well, you'll get co-op stores emerging. And we've got one down the road over around, what's the name of the little town? Easley, I think. It's up near Southern Wesleyan University's bike trail. But one of the great things about capitalist society is that it can accommodate cooperative structures and it can even accommodate voluntary communist societies like communes within it. Capitalism mostly just holds that people should be allowed to run their own businesses within the constraints of voluntary trade. You can do what you want, you just can't force other people to do your bidding for you. Well, this view, even though it may mainly lead to people running for-profit businesses, even though it may mainly lead to big corporations and other such, it doesn't mean that you can't open yourself a commune and all go live together in the woods and farm and run around naked. It doesn't mean that you can't have a co-op where the workers own the means of production. It just means that you can't force other people to live the same way that you do. And the reverse is not true in a socialist society. But that too is another thing. I am jacked for Unit 4. That too is another thing we'll get back to in Unit 4. This kind of clash between totalitarian systems versus ones based on freedom. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. I feel like that was kind of a little messy at the end, but anyways, in the next video, I'll get into macroeconomics proper. We'll start off with our discussion of gross domestic product. How do we measure the size of an economy? Because we're definitely going to have to be able to measure it if we're going to talk about, growth and decline. And I'll see you then.